Let's talk Stanley Cup Finals. Mike, it's not every year that we see the best team in the East and the best team in the West meet in the final. And for me, it just feels too close to call. So I'm going to lean on you heavy for this one. We look at the series. Panthers are favored minus 128. Oilers are the dog here at plus 106. What's a bet you like for the series?
I like the Oilers side here, Katie, and I've been on them since the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I think you're right, though. We have the two best teams in the NHL, and it's fascinating because it's the two teams that face the most difficult travel for an entire season. This series is absolutely crazy in terms of the travel, and we have contrasting styles, really. You've got an Oilers team that is certainly better offensively and way more talented, in my opinion, and explosive, but you've got a Panthers team that's way more well rounded, way more defensive minded. But for me, it's going to be the individual talent that I think wins out here with Connor McDavid. I also think there's some bias baked in to these lines, considering the fact that a Canadian team has not won the Stanley Cup final since 1993. I think that when you have that in the playoff experience of this Panthers team, I think it makes a lot of sense why they are the favorite. But I think these two teams are very, very close. And I'm going to bet on a very hungry Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl and company. I'll take them at a slight underdog in the series here.
Hasn't been back in Canada since 1993. You got to root for that. I know some of our colleagues there in Florida probably aren't too happy about this, but yeah, you got to root for the cup going back to Canada. Now looking at the Conn Smythe Trophy, also known as, the MVP award for people who aren't as familiar with the NHL. Who do you like to win?
For me, it's Connor McDavid. And I think it's important to remember this award is still about a complete body of work, not necessarily just these final games here. He's got 12 more points than the next highest point scorer on the Florida side. And when I look at the way this series could potentially play out, I think that it's going to have to be a little higher scoring with the Oilers. I think they're so good offensively. The goaltending is definitely a little suspect compared to the Florida side. But when we have more scoring, the scoring concentration for Edmonton is very likely to come from Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, where Florida is certainly going to have a more balanced attack. So I think that McDavid is going to have the opportunity to rack up stats. I think it's his award here, unless he just gets completely shut out in this series or they get swept, something like that, which I personally do not see happening. I think it's exceptional value. I honestly think it should be a lot closer to even money at this particular point. I think he is far and away the favorite to win this award.
All right, I love that. It's hard. I can't imagine them blocking him out and him not scoring some goals here. Connor McDavid is like a little mini of the great one, if you ask me. So 2-1, really, really like that. All right, so let's look at game one in this series. Panthers are favored minus 140. The total at 5.5. I know you like to do a lot of unders, but where are you taking us in game one?
I do, Katie. It's my favorite bet in really all professional sports when you get to the playoffs. It's that first period under. It is a
Ah,
very
yes.
uncomfortable sweat if you watch. It's a lot like betting first quarter unders in college football or the NFL, frankly. But when you get to the Stanley Cup final, the stakes are as high as they can get. We know how good Florida is defensively. Yes, Edmonton is definitely better offensively and wants to be aggressive, but neither team wants to surrender that first goal, especially if you're the Oilers on the road. So I don't think we see many power play opportunities, if any, in that first opening frame. I think it's a very tight defensive battle. I think the scoring really opens up in that second period here, but I'm going to fade a second goal. We're going to go under 1.5 goals here, minus 110.
All right, I like that a lot. Now, Mike, I do have to ask you, this is the farthest distance between teams in a Stanley Cup final from Florida all the way up to Edmonton. Does that impact how you bet this series at all?
Doesn't have a massive impact for me, just because both sides are certainly going to be dealing with it here, Katie. And both of these teams, frankly, are used to traveling. When you look at where they're geographically located, they almost always lead the NHL in terms of distance traveled. What I think is the most impressive part is that they've managed to get here. When you think about a sport like Major League Baseball, there's actually been a really strong correlation with teams having friendly schedules and flying fewer miles and reaching that World Series. So it's very fascinating to see the opposite here. I think that simply means we have the two best teams and we're looking at a very fascinating series.